2 summers ago, I cut up a big Sequoia log with my friend Brian. We got many big slabs out of it, but we also got some ends and some funny shaped bits that weren't really good for slabs. So I took some of these and I made one of them into a bowl blank, thinking I would turn it on the lathe. As I'm cutting this, I used a circle cut out of foam core to follow to make the circle for the bowl shape. This was before I had my circle cutting jig made on the bandsaw, and it's just screwed to the piece of wood. But it worked pretty well. It made a circle, which is just what I needed. After looking at this, I thought I really should cut it closer to a bowl shape, because I would have a ton of material to remove on the lathe if I turned it the way it is here. I made a jig for cutting circles at this point, so it's just a screw attached to a board. I can drill a hole in the flat side of the piece of wood and then set that in the screw on the piece of plywood, and then rotate the piece of wood around that screw and it'll cut a circle. Now with the table angled at 45 degrees, I get a cone shape, which is closer to the shape of the bowl that I want. So I rough turned it at this point. I attached a faceplate to the flat side of the wood, and that allowed me to work on the bottom and to make a tenon for the chuck. And once that tenon is made, I could turn the piece around and hollow out the bowl, which is what I'm doing here. I wouldn't recommend using gloves when turning. I did this before I knew better. Then I let this sit for about a year and dry, and I started to finish it up at this point, but I was having a terrible time getting the surface smooth with the regular lathe tools. And I realized I was going to need a really large chuck to hold the bowl backwards so that I could work on the bottom. I remember carving out the shape for the bowl was difficult because there was a knot right in the center, which is where the wood is turning the slowest, so it made it slow going. So I let it sit for another year after this, thinking about how I was going to get the surface smooth and how I was going to hold the bowl backwards with the bottom facing out. I decided what I needed to do was to make big jaws for my chuck that would be big enough to hold the rim of the bowl. So I cut out a circle out of a scrap piece of MDF that I had. So I think the circle diameter here is 22 inches, which will just fit on the lathe, and should be just big enough to hold the bowl. I'm using the same circle cutting jig that I made for the bowl when I first worked on it. Now the chuck is a 4-jaw chuck, so I need to cut the circle into 4 quarters. I decided that I should number them so I could keep track of them. They went back together again. I used my existing jaw chucks to find the holes that I would need to drill for the screws to mount these new plates to the chuck. Then it was just a matter of drilling those holes. I did need to be careful to make sure that they were in just the right places, but they did work in the end. I had to drill the countersink for the screws as well, and the bigger drill bit managed to center itself in the smaller holes. So that worked out well too. Then I mounted the new plates to the chuck, and the bowl seemed to fit, which was good. I thought I was going to have to balance the new jaws, but they actually felt pretty balanced on the lathe. So I just trued up the outer edge, which was dusty, but it worked really well. The last thing I wanted to do was make a series of cleats to go around the outer edge of the new jaw plates. I wanted them cut at the same angle as the bowl so that they would get a nice grip on the bowl. And I drilled holes and then cut that strip into cleats. Then I attached each of those cleats to the jaw plates with a screw. So now when I tighten up the chuck, those cleats will all hold the bowl in place. With this I could clean up the bottom, but mostly what I wanted to do at this point was to make the tenon round again so that it would fit back in the chuck. You can see now that I'm not wearing gloves, which is much safer. I clean up the tenon. It's good to be really precise about this so that it holds well in the chuck. So I take the chuck off and remount the bowl in the smaller jaws. Now I can finalize the inside. I removed some more material with my bowl gouge. I used my scraper to try and get the surface as smooth as I could before I started sanding. Now to work on the surface, I thought I would try my angle grinder because it would be a little bit more aggressive. And the little one worked, but I thought maybe I'd try my big angle grinder. So I got that out with a sanding disc on it. And if I went along real carefully, it actually worked pretty well. It was really quick, but it also gave me a good surface. So the surface was rough with sanding marks, but at least the fuzziness from the tools wasn't there. I sanded the outside of the bowl. Then I went through the different sanding grits with my drill sander. This is a lot slower, but I don't really have to take off that much material. I just have to get the surface smooth. Now I turn the bowl around again so that I can turn the tenon on the bottom into a foot for the bowl. I can work on the very bottom surface of the bowl as well, and work on the foot, and sand the very bottom form of the bowl. There's a void at the bottom of the bowl that made it a little bit tricky, but it was okay. And now the bowl is done. And I'll clean up the surface with mineral spirits to get the dust off. And then some linseed oil beeswax finish. And it's done. There's a few little defects here and there, but there's some spots in the grain of the wood that are really beautiful. But it turned out pretty nice for a 2-year-long project. Thanks for watching.